Today's episode of the Gestalt Education Show is brought to you by three of our favorite sponsors: Human Locomotion, Core 360 Belt, and Dynamic Disc Designs. All the information can be found below. By now, you have definitely heard us talk about them, so check out the show notes, click the links, use the codes, and make sure you support our favorite people. As always, we got a great episode lined up for you today, and thanks for tuning in. All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Gestalt Education Show. Today, we are in Lincoln, Nebraska at Lincoln Sports Performance and Sports Medicine. And I screwed it up, Pete. Performance and Sports Medicine. Shoot! I just lost $10 to Pete there,
That
guys.
is
So
insane.
that's tough. Yep. What are you going to do?
How did you know? You're like Vegas.
Man, oh man. Anyway, today we are back with one of our very special friends, Dr. Tyler Ideus. So we drug Brett all the way to the greatest city in America, Lincoln, Nebraska. So we got a big game.
Place is rotten.
Yeah.
I mean rotten.
Watch it. We got a whole crew here.
Yeah, no,
so
well,
you're outnumbered.
Stay tuned because we're going to give Brett a special tour of an actual trophy case. So something that Mizzou really doesn't have a lot of experience with. So, but anyway, today we are sitting down with Tyler once again, and Tyler, obviously, international DNS instructor, one of my big mentors here in Lincoln. You treat my family, so I appreciate that. So I don't have to. So that's huge. As Brett knows and everybody knows, treating your family is literally the worst. It's the hardest thing you can do. But anyway, so today we kind of talked a little bit about force plates the last time you were on, but it was still kind of in its infancy, Tyler. And so today, what I would love to kind of start with is like where are you at with it right now, and then we're going to get into some more of like the specifics on what kind of metrics we're actually seeing change, and specifically with DNS exercise and those types of things. So
Yeah, so with the force plates, I've been using them on and off for, realistically 8 years, more just in, new patient evaluations with our athletes, those types of things. However, more recently, we've been involved with a couple youth basketball clubs in the area, big clubs, the size of 1,500, 1,600 athletes. And so we've created a system where we use force plates to collect kind of preseason data on all these athletes. We worked with a software company in town to create an app that basically, once we run the test, their information, some of their performance information, size information, some kind of injury risk type of things go into the app. Then the athletes, the parents can see that information. And so through that process, we've been able to learn a lot about characteristics of the force time curve, which is something that you get with a force plate jump, different characteristics of, what people move like when they're healthy. They do get an injury, for example, what they move like after an injury, and just starting to piece a lot of these things together with some of that objective data. It's quick, it's simple, it's easy. So that's kind of where we're at. We've done that for a couple of years. I think we're probably at close to 6,000 force plate tests at this point, and we'll try to get more and continue to shift through all the data.
It's not really that big of a footprint. I mean, it's...
Yeah, no, I've done motion capture stuff. We've done other, functional testing, all those types of things. The nice thing about the force plates are they're relatively inexpensive. You get really great data from them. It's reliable data, but it's quick and it's easy. Mm-hmm. And, in like a club setting or, a sports setting with the team, something like that, a lot of times with coaches, for example, the big thing is they don't want to take time out of their practice, all these types of things to do a bunch of testing. But if it's like, hey, we can get your whole team through, 20, 30 athletes, for example, in a matter of 30 minutes, they really like that. So it's a small footprint. It's easy to bring around. You can bring them on site. It's quick, great information. So I think it's a home run for that.
What about, so what are the other metrics that you're gathering when you are doing these assessments? Obviously you're doing the force plates, but then are you doing other things like white balance, functional testing, range of motion, things like that? Or what's your goal as far as your all encompassing?
So with what we're doing with the clubs, is we're just simply doing the force plate testing for the purpose of making it quick, making it easy, making it simple. Now, if you have a handful of athletes in this large set where they're displaying things that would be concerning as far as injury risk, those types of things, then those are kind of identified. Then maybe you go into a little more in-depth testing with them. We can say, well, hey, based off of what we see here, we're not going to predict that you're going to get an injury, but according to some of the research we've seen, you might be in a higher risk category. We think it would be good for you to address some of these deficits or deficiencies. And then with those handful of athletes, you can go into the more in-depth testing, those types of things.
And then what movements are you testing on the force plate? Is that just a pure vertical jump or what?
Yeah. So what we're doing is we're just doing what's called an akimbo counter movement jump. And that's just basically hands on hips. And then you just jump as hard and as high as you can. The akimbo style, basically takes out the arm swing. So it's really kind of the truest assessment of lower extremity function. So,
right.
And then what are the trends you notice, like with the basketball players and things?
Yeah. So, there's going to be, I would say, kind of maybe 4 main strategies that we're seeing. And those would be basically like a knee dominant type of a jumper, where when you squat down, knees are really shooting forward. You're going to have more of a hip dominant type of a jumper where you're basically doing like a deadlift. It's all hip, as you squat down, basically your spine becomes, parallel to the ground. So you're really using, basically hip movement. We see kids that are landing in like your, E version or that knee valgus position. And then you also see, again, those kind of rigid midfoot, knee varus type of positions. So you kind of have that E version, inversion landing or jumping strategy, and then the knees forward and then the hip dominant.
And is the goal to change their style of jumping or just to give them more like bandwidth in their bad pattern through like good DNS corrective exercise or whatever it might be?
I think my opinion, along with others that I've talked to, is if you are starting to get outside of, let's just say, kind of a normal range, or you're a very obvious hip dominant jumper, knee dominant jumper, for example, I do think we want to try to influence that a little bit. You can see in those scenarios, you're going to be a little more prone to, knee issues, I think, back issues, those types of things. So I think we can feel good about trying to create a more balanced jump. And a balanced jump then is also a lot more efficient. And so that, if we get into the force time curve a little bit, there's some research that shows there's a certain type of force time curve that is basically the most efficient. The best jumpers are using this type of a strategy. When you see some of those knee dominant jumpers, hip dominant jumpers, for example, they are not jumping with that really nice jump strategy. They're not efficient, for example. So,
and then how do you guarantee that it'll spill over like to the basketball court? Like if you change it in a setting like this, then they go out in the heat of the battle in the basketball game. Is there, it's a question, I've talked about that before, but
I think, for us to say, we guarantee it's going to transfer over to a game every single time, probably not. In a game setting, it's so uncontrolled. You're diving for a basketball, your center of mass is off, all those types of things. So it might not be a situation where every time they jump in a game, it's going to be ideal. But, if we're in practice, for example, we're doing strength and conditioning, all those types of things, a box jump, if we can move with a better strategy, maybe decrease load, increase capacity to be in bad positions during a game, something like that, I think is really what our target is.
If you work on it like in this setting out in the gym and then like in some jump training, that you're giving their central nervous system more opportunities to see what's right. And then I think it's a better opportunity for them when they're out on the court.
I think too, like in, sports medicine has changed their opinion a little bit on load lately too. A lot of research too. We looked at for little leaguers. They counted basically how many pitches for little leaguers, and it was just total throws. So I think just load in general, I think, is another kind of avenue to reduce risk. Meaning, if you're reducing load in the weight room and you're reducing load in the practice facility and things like that, maybe not load as far as total weight, but load as far as shitty positions and things like that, then hopefully you're giving your body a chance to not break down those tissues.
And are the best jumpers that you've dealt with always putting more force into the earth, or is it not always a trend that is correlated like that?
No, I would say it's you don't always see that. Like some of the best jumpers, when we're talking jump strategy, they're not always the perfect strategy,
Right.
And with a good strategy also comes, efficiency and those types of things. So you can have people that are putting less force into the ground, less propulsive force, for example, but jumping higher. You can see from actually one individual from one test to the next test where they'll put less force into the ground and have a higher jump height, for example. So again, that just kind of goes back to some of that efficiency. So in an ideal jump strategy, for example, the bottom of your squat or the bottom of your jump should be when you put the most force into the ground. That's when you're the most eccentrically loaded. And so you have that, the most kind of elastic energy stored at that point. And that's at the time you should put the most force into the ground. So that's a good, efficient jump. You can go high without necessarily having to put as much force into the ground in that scenario.
And do you think like the quality of support matters? Obviously in DNS, we spend a lot of time focusing on like the interface between the foot and the ground. So do you think that's a detail that matters, or you think that's kind of eyewash and really doesn't?
I mean, you can, as far as jump strategy, and if we're trying to achieve a good jump strategy, I've experimented with different things. So one thing you can simply do to improve jump strategy is cue them on what they should feel underneath their foot when they go into a jump. I've also messed around with just, not cueing what you should feel underneath your foot, doing some of the different DNS exercises, helping them to move through their hips better, understand what how to be mobile, how to be stable, those types of things through DNS exercises with zero cueing. And that also is improving jump strategy.
Do you ever use any of Thomas Schaud's Toe Pro things?
I do use the Toe Pro, but I haven't used it.
I bet that would be.
It would be another cool experiment to see. But
we'll have
no,
send you one.
Yeah. Well, I think because at the end of the day, it's so difficult to do what you're trying to do, which is to try to mitigate injury, right? To try to mitigate risk. And I think, it's easy. And we say it all the time in seminar settings. Well, the only predictor of future injury is previous injury, right? Yeah. And so, you told an interesting story about return to play. And I think one of the big return to play question marks we have is post ACL. Yeah. So you're 2 or 3 times more likely to tear your ACL, even on the opposite side after you've had the surgery. And they're saying that waiting 12 to 14 months is actually the gold standard. But you brought up an interesting scenario of a guy that tore his ACL, cleared all the functional testing and wide balance testing, but maybe didn't reflect that on the force plates. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah. So with all the testing, with the large groups that we're doing with the clubs, the number one purpose for it was to have baseline data. Right, because we all know that the injury prediction game is a tough game. I mean, you can't do it. So, but like you said, what we do know is if you've had the injury, you're more likely to do it again. Or even with ACLs, I've seen a lot where it's then the other side, goes, for example. So if we can have baseline data before the injury ever occurs, I mean, now we're really talking, and that's what we don't have. Right. So when you do, get assessed to return to play, what do you compare that to, for example, right? So that's kind of the number one goal of why we're doing with the clubs. So then, unfortunately, or a good thing, however you want to look at it, we've had some scenarios where we've had healthy athletes tear, where we've done their jump and then they have torn the ACL, and then they can come back and we can see where they different, what are we seeing, all those types of things. So in the past, we've done things like wide balance, after several months, athletes, in PT settings will also potentially get like the biodex where you're doing kind of your isokinetic testing, and you'll get some information, and I love the Y balance and I use it. However, one thing we did see was after an ACL tear, the injured side actually performed better on a Y balance than the non-injured side. So obviously they've been rehabbing, they're more aware of that leg, focus, they have mobility, all those types of things. So it looks great as far as that test goes. Biodex, you're seeing more, symmetry, that isokinetic strength. However, the interesting thing is then you get them on the force plates when it's actually, a really dynamic environment. You're putting force into the ground, you have that power, speed, strength component, and then we're still seeing some of these big deficits. And you see the deficits, from output metrics, so how you're putting force into the ground, for example, like a force, but then you're also seeing it in strategy metrics as well. So the force time curve, for example, is a really neat strategy thing to look at, and you'll see kind of the smoothness of that curve, become more choppy. It's less smooth. You have less ideal, eccentric loading. It's kind of that ratchety type of movement that Pavel talks about. So you're still seeing some of those type of characteristics in the way that they move, even though they look really good on some of those other more controlled, tests that you would use to return to play.
Well, and I think we would all have an issue with the biodex with an isokinetic strategy because the foot's not on the ground. Yeah. And so testing the musculature, testing the strategy while they're in a seated position, it's hard to then justify that's going to carry over. And so I think that's something that I struggle with doing a lot of return to play with post ACL or post whatever it might be, is just because the testing looks good, the strategy could be completely different. And so if I'm hearing you right, you can kind of back up what you're seeing with your eyes strategy wise with the force time curve in the actual force.
Well, in orthopedics too, what they use is an open chain repetitive, which is nothing like what actually would be happening, so yeah.
Yep. So that's that's been a really interesting thing to see, and certainly we you still want to use the other tests, those types of things, but man, for me, really, if you don't have that pre-injury, that pre-testing screen, I always compare it to like the preseason concussion test, that you take. How do you really know what you're trying to what are you trying to get back to? You do have the injury now. We do have, we can use force plates. We can still use Y balance, biodex, all those types of things. But now I think we can feel a lot better about sending someone out there. And then it's not always that you just see, deficit on the injured side, so often you're seeing, way more, propulsive force or landing force or, those types of things on that uninjured side. And that's what I've seen several times is, we spend so much time on that injured side, then an athlete goes back and then it's not too long and it's the other, ACL.
On someone who hasn't been injured, is it always their dominant side that you see, like for kicking, for example, or that they're...
I haven't seen that. It's something I need to.
No.
One of the other questions that we could answer, but those are all things. Again, when you're collecting some of that objective data, that you can start to experiment with. The one thing that is interesting that I found, and I haven't dug into it a ton yet, but we did a group of volleyball players, and we did what was called the athletic shoulder test. And so basically for this test, you're laying on your stomach, basically in front of the plate. You can put, just force into the plate, at full flexion or, let's say, 90 degrees abduction or in between, depending on like if you're a volleyball player, baseball player, kind of wherever your arm slot is. Right. And what I figured is in volleyball players that during an isometric test that I would see more strength on the dominant side. However, the majority of the volleyball players were actually stronger on their non-dominant side. So I don't have a great or clear answer on that yet. And, my mind went to, okay, well, is there something within the swing or whatever where they're creating more dominance on the right side of the abdominal wall? Do they create a better point of, support on that side that allows them to be stronger on the left? I don't know, but those are interesting things that we can see and look at. And because I would have not guessed that,
You wouldn't think that.
No. And I was even for a little while, I was like, are we doing this test right? Like what's going on here? We're putting it on the wrong plate because you have a right and a left plate. And it was consistent that non-dominant side was stronger.
Interesting. So. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it just goes to show how involved the entire kinetic chain in the entire body is within athletic movement. And so, that's what intrigued me so much about DNS early on, is that it's a full body way of assessing and then treating. And so just addressing the one side because they're a volleyball player doesn't mean that you're going to address the entire body when they go to actually jump and leave the ground and things like that. So.
What about intra-abdominal pressure regulation? Like, have you toyed around with
I toyed around with a little bit of just cueing, trying to create intra-abdominal pressure, relaxed, more of kind of like a brace type of scenario. In messing around with that, I haven't seen a change in athletic performance.
Right.
When I did mess around with that, I would say I was less of an expert in jump strategy. I was, as you use the plates more, man, there's so much information you can get from it. So I'm always seeing new things. Maybe if I would look back at some of those experiments I did, maybe it didn't change jump height, but maybe it changed jump strategy. Mm-hmm. But it didn't necessarily immediately change some performance or an output metric. However, when I messed around with the foot loading, where you actually cue different feeling in the foot when you jump, then that did immediately improve performance a little bit. So the output metric as well as the strategy metric.
Could you talk about when people are not in the right strategy, whether this is golf or baseball, whatever the sport is, we talk about the importance of giving good cues.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about the jumping strategies that we see that may not be ideal. So let's just say they're jumping, too much in their knees or their hips, whatever. What are some real simple cues that you use to get somebody out of those strategy?
So for just a simple cue with jumpers like that is you just simply talk about what you should feel underneath your foot as you're going through your lowering or your braking phase. Yeah. So then focus on what you feel underneath your foot. This is how we should load the foot. The tripod, example is really good. And then when you're putting force through the ground, put those 3 points through the ground as hard as you can at the bottom of your jump and go. Okay. And you will see that clean a lot.
What about like a knee squatter and you're trying to get them more into their hip? Is it as simple as the
ways that I've done that? Yeah. I mean, literally just teaching them what to feel under their foot is huge. Now, we can, if we want to go a little bit farther, you can back that up with, I've done, like the trap bar deadlift, for example, is a great way, what they're feeling under their foot, basically what the path of the bar should be, as they're going through that movement. With the trap bar deadlift, for example, I'll put a piece of tape or in the carpet where the weight is, when it's on the ground, where the weight is, and they have to make sure that weight is going straight up and coming straight back down to that point. Right. And as long as that with a trap bar, that bar is following that exact same path straight up and down, you're loading your foot the right way. You almost literally can't go into a bad hip or knee position at that point.
And there's been a little bit of research over the years to where if you, for example, statically stretch your hamstrings before you do a vertical jump, that you would potentially, take some height. Do you believe that? Then there's been some conflicting evidence recently of some of those thoughts. What would you say to that? Do you think that, who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Another experiment I could do.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the best jumpers what's their gift? What do they?
The best jumpers, I mean, it's certainly not strategy.
Right.
I mean, literally the highest vertical jumper that we've had a huge hip dominant strategy.
Right.
There's some different things on impulse ratios that are telling us a little bit like how quickly you're going to get off the ground. You could have a little less of a jump height, but if you get off the ground really, really quickly in a sport like basketball, for example, that quickness might be the advantage to getting a rebound.
Right.
But if you're just talking about something like jump height, it's certainly not strategy, So, there's probably a lot of things that go into it as far as genetics and tissue stiffness. I've seen a lot of athletes be really explosive, jump really high, that are really, really stiff, for example. So then sometimes that's where the question comes in, is how much stiffness do you want to take away?
Oh, I know.
And then I've seen some of the just like, I used to think for a while that to be explosive, it was a prerequisite to have stiff hips and have stiff ankles. Then one time I assessed a Nebraska football player that was a high pick in the NFL draft. He was a cornerback. He was a 4.4 type of guy. And I mean, he had the lowest muscle tone, like perfect ranges of motion, zero stiffness. So in that athlete, then you have to that's just a genetic thing that God gave him. He moves really well. He's super quick twitch and he can just fly.
Well, the reason I asked is because they talked about like Michael Jordan having these like super, super stiff hamstrings. Like his straight leg raise was like 45 degrees or something crazy. Yep. And then obviously like he's got very tiny calves, and it's kind of interesting to see like who these great jumpers, like, is the power actually coming from the hips, or is it like elastic storage out of the lower extremity?
Well, I think it depends on the athlete and their morphology, how they're built, just like, for example, my son, he has really stiff, high arch, stiff ankles, really dominant with his calves. When you compare him to hundreds of other kids his age, as far as jump height, for example, it's good, it's a little bit above average, but it's not necessarily the top. But then he also runs track. He does hurdles, for example, hurdle sprints, and he excels at sprinting. He does great at sprinting and great at hurdles.
That's Caitlin's genius.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, his calves, his feet, and all that, it's to the T exactly like my wife. It was a Division I high jumper, But so to me, when I look at him, for example, like he just stores so much elastic energy in his foot and in his ankle that it allows him to be fast. That's the thing that allows him to be fast. Mm-hmm. Then when you look at it, you're kind of like, oh, well, as he continues to train when he gets older, it's what makes him good, but it's also probably something that we're going to have to be careful of. How much plyos are you doing? How much time are you spending on the track? How are you running curves in an indoor track versus an outdoor track? All those types of things that would leave him susceptible to something in the future. But if you're aware of those things and you can kind of manage them through load and those types of things, because I'm not going to take that foot structure away. Right. We can hopefully make it, function a little bit better, but compared to the athlete that just has everything, they move perfect. They don't have, stiff muscles or anything like that. They probably have the ability to train a little different way,
Can we switch in, talking about application of DNS principles? And so we talked about the foot loading, obviously. What's some of like your, maybe, I don't know, your top 2 or 3 programs that you're giving these athletes as far as changing whatever the strategy is that you're trying to change? Like, is there a pattern of the things that you're usually working on, or like, hey, you're going to do these 3 DNS exercises plus a trap bar deadlift or something along those lines? Like, what does the programming kind of look like if you have an athlete as a patient?
So one thing that, again, when you look at a force time curve and you're looking at strategy, when they go into an eccentric phase, where again you have to relax initially to lower your body, you see less coordination or less smoothness in that phase. So the first thing that I'm trying to always do is create smoothness or efficiency in different types of eccentric, loading types of movements. Things like, like I talked about at the DNS Congress, for an ACL, for example, we want to be able to be stable in all segments, but then create that flexion, extension of the knee in like that 3-month supine position, for example, creating nice, smooth, efficient movement at the knee joint, right, then left, same thing, 3-month supine with the hip, everything's staying stable, except you're moving the hip in, those, as big as circles as you can, where you do it efficiently. Things that an athlete's going to be able to feel what it feels like to load their foot the right way, be able to feel activity of, glutes, hamstrings, for example, and maybe like a, supported, or a hanging, position or something like that, that's unilateral. And then obviously being able to connect between the chest and the pelvis is all a prerequisite for anything. So that's where it's been interesting in some of the experiments too, is, not necessarily telling someone what they should feel while they jump, but just implementing DNS exercises, the way that we all do. And then without leading them into any jump strategy, watch them jump. And that's the amazing thing that we shared at the Congress, the times we've seen that. That's every time I said I could have kissed the person, because it improved the strategy so much. Right. Those are really exciting things to see. That without, again, leading somebody into something, just improving the way that they move, you see these very obvious objective changes in a positive direction. I don't know what else we could want.
That's saying God, we trust, everyone else bring data, but like the people want to see, because otherwise you create these miracles in your patients all day long. You don't have a way to like show them. That's right. So it's a way to objectify. Or I think too, sometimes we get humbled and like we think we're like, oh, I thought I was doing this, and then you look at the data, you're like, oh, like And
that's where the big thing is I think too, is just in that performance component, and that's the big thing is you can be ultra athletic or, jump high and all those types of things, but it doesn't require, this, more balanced strategy to do that. You can have deficits, you can move in weird ways, and you can still have really high performance. So that's one of the things that, we're trying to answer with some of these really, really big groups is, okay, well, out of 5,000 athletes that have poor strategy, what percentage of those are those higher, likelihood of getting injured, and it's not always with these data sets. It's not like we're just looking at, a 1-year time frame. Right. We're going to have this information on these kids for many, many years, so that eventually we can say, well, yeah, you got away with moving like crap for 7 seasons or whatever, but now it's caught up to you. You've got older, you've played more games, some of these tournaments, summer tournaments, you're playing on 2 teams. So you're playing 8 to 10 games a weekend. Now you're in high school, you're lifting more, whatever it might be. Now do some of these poor strategies really start to, kind of expose themselves.
And it seems like a lot of the focus goes around the ACL injury. Is there other injuries orthopedically that you guys are, I'm assuming inversion ankle sprains is another big one in basketball.
So kind of your, some of the data I've seen from NBA, you're going to look at those that land in more inversion, for example, kind of that higher arched stiff ankle athlete. They're more likely to have basically injuries around the ankle. So Jones fractures, kind of almost non-contact, lower extremity or, ankle and foot injuries, for example. Those that are landing in eversion, those are the ones that are more likely to have injuries upstream a little bit, knee, hip, for example. And then, again, with that knee dominant strategy, those are probably, a little bit more of your whatever patellofemoral types of issues. But then I think you're also seeing that a lot with the ACLs, just these people that are just massively quad dominant. And then as far as the hip jump goes, I haven't found a big correlation with them yet. However, when I look at them, I just have to think this athlete, it has to have back pain at some point, right? Because those are the ones that typically are walking around, with that anteverted pelvis, their lumbar erectors are always just, tight as can be, tight hip flexors, and, but time will tell.
When we had Tim Hewitt on, which is one of the leading researchers for the ACL, he talked about knee dominance being a predictor, and he truly believes knee dominant jumpers are a predictor for ACL tears. Obviously, he's in the ACL world, but I 100% agree. If you see more of a hip dominant jumper, like that is spondylolisthesis or pars defect, things like that, especially in volleyball, which I know that you have a huge population with. So, for what it's worth, Hewitt says the exact same thing. So,
but don't forget about the quadricep, as we learned from Christopher Powers from USC. Like, he had a really good podcast on, like, we've talked so much about the hip and the foot, and then he kind of just enlightened us with some of the research on like quadricep strengthening and stuff like that.
Yeah, as far like the whole quad itself, the way it's putting out
he doesn't
power,
really break
or more
it into
of
like he wasn't 100% convinced that like VMO made such but overall strength of
well, and that would be interesting for me to look at, and as I watch a knee dominant jumper, from just a visual standpoint, but then they also have a unique jump strategy on a force time curve. I couldn't sit there and say they're using their quads more.
Yeah, just because you see their knee over their toes doesn't mean they're necessarily using it. Yeah,
maybe they're using their calf way more. I don't know.
No, exactly.
Maybe then we would look at a biodex or something and see, are you truly way more, dominant in your quads? Maybe your knees go forward and your quads aren't very active. I don't know.
Exactly.
What about to that point? Are you at the point now that you've seen enough of these that you can see someone jump and then kind of predict what the curve is going to look like, or kind of look with the data, or how often are you getting fooled as far as what the data looks like versus what they actually look like jumping?
Yeah, you can be relatively predictive on certain strategy characteristics. And as far as some of the performance metrics go, I mean, you can see a really good jumper. One of the interesting characteristics of the best jumpers, or jump the highest, there's a lot of other things that go on, but just the ones that jump the highest, when they get to the top of their jump, they're in massive amounts of ankle mortise dorsiflexion. They're in just maximum hip extension, knee extension, and they're in max ankle mortise dorsiflexion. Every great, powerful athlete that jumps really high that I see has that. Wow. And I don't know if that's, where they've created so much power, you just have that, tendon reflex where you're going to go into that dorsiflexion after you've created so much, plantar flexion in the ankle. But that's an interesting characteristic. As soon as you see that, that they're going to have good jump metrics, output metrics.
Right.
Any advice on footwear for the basketball athlete? I mean, is there any new trends that are not really?
Not really.
The shoe fits, right?
I mean, basketball shoe is, I just say something that, has and most all the new ones do. Some of the old ones are a little bit different, but that it's around the edges that you're more rounded. Some of them have like more of an acute, like 90-degree angle from the bottom of the shoe to the side of the shoe. So if I'm starting to land into a little bit of eversion, I would want that more gradual, curve into the sole. I see that some.
Give yourself more of a chance to basically save it for your brain to take over.
Chance to save it. Yep. I don't like too much cushion. We really want to feel the ground. And then something, again, that's going to be more of like a leather material that when you tighten that thing up, I mean, it becomes part of your foot. Really.
Yeah, and Tom talks about that too at the running athlete. Like if we have too much cushion, you have too much what's called dwell time. So you're like soaking up all that energy, all that elastic storage, but kind of in a bad way. And then it's basically taking away your springs. So if you have a less of a dwell time from the time you land as you're creating that energy to create your jump, the better actually. Yeah. So the more cushion, the more that would potentially be taking away.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if you think a little bit back to a good example is when Zion was playing for Duke and he cut so hard and he tore the shoe out, when you're in basketball, when you're cutting and you're trying to defend somebody and you have to stop. And I mean, the last thing you want is to feel your foot give in your shoe, So whatever shoe you can get in, that has some of those characteristics that we talk about, those are the things that you want to avoid,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. 10 years from now, Tyler, you've been collecting data, you've been making interventions, you've been doing things. What would make you proud?
Assuming he's still alive.
Yeah, that's right.
He lives pretty hard.
That's right. So what would make you proud, or what would be like mission success, in 10 years?
So 10 years, if like like we get a sports physical right now, in every city across the US, people are, collecting this preseason data with force plates, for example. The app that we use, everyone's putting their data into that. They can see, they can see where they were, what they need to improve on, those types of things. Then the next step is trying to get AI involved into these massive data sets. So if we could have everyone in the country, every athlete doing the same thing, we're using AI, and maybe they're finding some weird stuff that or it's finding some weird stuff that we've never even thought about, that, hey, just so you know, every athlete that's doing this, and maybe it's some performance metric, I don't really know, that this is you have a high percentage of eventually having an injury. But the other thing is, sometimes if people don't always understand, like, what am I supposed to do with this? But I'll tell you what, every parent of a kid that's been injured, the little bit of money that they spend on that test, they would have paid thousands of dollars to have that information when they're trying to decide if their kid is ready to go play again. Right. So in 10 years, if everybody, all of our friends and connections and everything, if we would all be on board and getting these preseason tests, we're putting it into one big unified data set. We're using things like AI to find really great information. That's what would make me
beautiful,
happy. Yeah,
I love it.
Tony Robbins says information without a purpose is useless. And I always put this paper up in our DNS baseball courses where in the last 6 years, we're actually doing a worse job of preventing hamstring injuries than we were previously, which is so fascinating to me because we have, especially in MLB, it's like golf. There's so much technology that's being used. And to think that now that we have all this information and we're actually doing a worse job. Yeah. And I just think like it just tells the story of like you still as technology continues to advance, there's still going to, we still need good therapy. We still need good. Right. Yeah. It's kind of a
and I think too, we all know that when we look at people, there's so many unique variabilities that research in small sets is always hard. Yeah, and I would even say a few hundred people is still a small set.
Right.
But now if you start to get 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 people, and I think there's a lot to be learned from those, really, really large sets. Now you're really start to tease out maybe some of the weird, unique things that you could see in a small group of people. Not a lot different than the athlete that can perform really well. That's really stiff, and the athlete that performs really well that isn't stiff at all.
Right.
They're gonna. You look at them, they're going to be two totally different types of findings if you're researching performance, for example.
Right. Yep. Beautiful. Any last thoughts?
I don't think so.
What about if people are interested in implementing this or getting more involved? Like, what's the easiest way to start doing this?
If people want to be part of, so the app that we have is called NextStat. There's a website for it. If people actually want to be a part of that, the easiest way would just go to, I think it's nextstat.com, and there's a place where you can email and contact if you have questions or anything like that. But we'd love to have similar facilities and things like we do here at, in everywhere. And even for, I always think if you're thinking more of the, it's even business side, clinical side, even, for young docs, starting docs, or even established, what a great way to go out and start establishing relationships with people in these communities. If you can work with a club, for example, now you've just opened yourself up as an expert in front of, 1,500 sets of parents or whatever it may be.
I would much rather do spinal screening at Walmart.
Yeah. that's one way.
Plumb line.
You know? So it's a great practice builder. It's quick, it's easy. You know, it doesn't take a ton of time for what you get, and I think it's ultra valuable for the athletes. But then could also be a great practice builder for people in the clinic as well.
And it all comes full circle in December. So you did your internship with us way back when, and then you get to help in the C course.
Let's go.
C. That's right.
Yep. No, that'll
be surreal.
Yeah. No, that's always a neat accomplishment, you know, that you've worked hard, you put in the time, and you know, you've been led and you know, guided down the right direction, and eventually it all pays off. Keep going. So
that's right. Yeah. So I mean, for the students out there listening, we have evolved the intern curriculum like crazy in the last even 5 years, and you know, it's different even from when you were there, from when I was there, and so we are on a literal war path to make it the best internship and the best residency program in the nation, and so we would love to have you if you're interested in joining the internship. You go to gestaltedu.com/internship. You can apply, and we would love to have you in Troy, just like Tyler.
Yep.
So we think too. I mean, like, our interns have gone on to do just amazing things. Like, the list of interns from Winchester Spine and Sport is pretty impressive. I mean, Taylor Premer, you know, Tyler Ideus, Rich Ohm, and all these awesome people, and it's really cool to be part of a fraternity. And I know, Brett, you feel really special about having people go on to do really great things after interning with you.
Yeah, and what a good example of this.
Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
I'll say one thing too. You know, even aside from the clinical aspect, the things that you learn, you know, one thing that I always think about being around Brett, for example, was just the mentality of trying to be great, you know, and you know, just kind of dipping your foot into that, being exposed to that from him. You know, then you continue down that path, and you know, from there, I always think about the Mamba mentality, you know, but that. Just that kind of commitment to being great, what it takes to be great, you know, the hard work, all those types of things, you know, even as a high school, let's say, athlete, college athlete, student, those types of things, you know, you want to do well, you want to be successful, but then when you get around, you know, someone that has that mentality, that drive, that's really motivational, you know, and that's not just important for clinic, that's important for life and in your health and well-being, and you know, so you get a lot more than just you know, how to treat someone.
Right.
So
right.
Exactly.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah. I love it.
You changed my life.
Yeah, I love it.
First time I've ever cried.
Yeah, Jesus, head's getting giant if you're watching on YouTube. So, well, I think at the end we're gonna turn the mics off, and I think switch the camera over to the force plate. We got Petey with us, and so we'll see if Cavs McGee can actually jump. So we're gonna film him doing a little bit of a jump assessment, and then that way we can get a little bit of an idea of what the data looks like when it spits out and stuff like that. So, but anyway, Tyler, thanks, buddy. I'll see you in December, first weekend in December in Troy, Missouri.
We're gonna have some serious fun.
It'll be a lot of fun, so we would love to see you there. But anyway, good luck with patience, and we'll see you next time, guys.
And I'll give you the go sign, but you'll hear there should be a speaker. You have to stand super still for a second, and that's weighing you basically, and then you just jump as high as you can.
Hands on hips.
Hands on hips. Okay.
You ready?
Face us.
Gotcha.
Yep. And plus, that's the right plate. So you have to have right foot on the right plate. So right foot there.
Step on.
Yep. Okay, dude. So, So still and go ahead. Good. Okay. So we do this jump height goes in meters. So 0.45 meters. That's pretty good. I'm trying to think what the highest one we have was. I can bring it up. Your jump strategy is really good, actually.
Nice.
Yep.
I'm gonna show what the graph looks like.
You want to see? Yeah, I don't know what you want me to.
Yeah.
But so.
Tilt down just a little bit. Yeah, there we go.
So here is like the still phase. So it's just weighing you. That your weight is important for obviously a lot of these calculations. So then this is your unweighting phase. And I can show you, for example, what like a post ACL unweighting phase looks like. But this is a nice, smooth downward curve. In injured athletes, a lot of times you see this real kind of just wavy line that goes straight across it. You just don't have a nice, efficient unweighting phase. And that's where that one research study showed that I shared at the Congress was one of the most important things in jump performance is your ability to unweight. So those that can relax and unweight the best typically have better, jump output metrics. So this is when you're going down. Now, as the line goes up, you're actually still going down. Mm-hmm. But now, your weight is starting to go into the plate.
Yeah.
And this point here where that blue dot is, that's where you want your highest propulsive force to be, which you're right on that. So that means you're putting power into the plate at the most ideal, eccentrically loaded position. And then you want, again, this is, if we have good foot loading, you have this kind of bimodal curve here. So we can see that you have a good jump strategy typically. Like a really knee dominant jumper, somebody that's, way on their toes. For example, knees going way forward, you'll just see one curve. So they don't, it's just all on their toes. Mm-hmm. And then they jump. And then with a hip dominant jumper, you actually see this part be a little bit lower. And then that second curve is higher. So it's almost a reverse of that. Yep. And then this is in the flight. So this is kind of when you're pushing through the plate, you're still moving up, Now your forefoot, basically your calves push down, and then you leave flight, and then this is your landing phase.
Cool.
The yellow line is basically, both together. Then you have the blue and the orange, which is indicating right and left. So this follows pretty good during that basically braking propulsive phase, and then your landing is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. So we could look at, like you, for example, if we're just looking at symmetry,
forcing the plate side to side when you're landing.
So for you, like your left, right average landing force. So a negative number means you're more on the right. So that, you're on that jump, it was 13.74% different, mm-hmm. Or more on the right side. The research that I've read is there's actually kind of some different blocks on where people get concerned, but you start getting over 20, especially 25% difference, right, left is when we start to kind of flag some of these athletes. And then when you see somebody 4 months after an ACL, 5 months after, you're seeing 30 and 40% differences on right and left, for example. Yep. MRSI 0.56, that's really good. That's like a kind of a measurement of explosiveness, for example. So
cool.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Gestalt Education Show. If you liked it, share it, subscribe to it, send it to your friends, send it to someone that needs to hear this message. We really want everyone to be able to tune in and get the best clinical advice that they can, which we're hoping that we're giving to you with these special guests. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us, or if you have any suggestions on upcoming conversations, let us know. For a list of our upcoming courses, we're adding them all the dang time. So go to gestaltedu.com, click on courses, and they'll all be right there for you. All right, have a good day.